Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Hello and welcome back to the show. My name is Olly, and if this is the first time you're listening, I want to say thank you for listening. Welcome to the show. And the reason this show exists is because language learning is difficult. If you're learning a foreign language, it can take a long time. And it can be a kind of lonely journey at times, you know, when you're stuck at home studying by yourself with no one to talk to. And so this is why I created the show, to give you the motivation that you need to keep going, to know that you're not alone, and to listen to other people's problems as well, so that you know that you're not the only one struggling with the process of learning. Now, one of the questions that I get so often on the blog, or perhaps not so much a question, but one of the comments and one of the big concerns I get so often is people who say, you know, Olly, I can't learn this language that I'm learning because I can't go abroad. I can't move to the country. And people feel that unless they go and live abroad, they can't really learn the language seriously. And this is a very, very common thing, and it's probably something that I used to think as well. And the point of what I want to say today is that actually, these days, when I'm learning a new language, the last thing I do is get on a plane and travel. A lot of people hear this and they say, what are you talking about? But here's the thing. I think that until you're a more advanced speaker of a language, there are more disadvantages to traveling abroad than advantages. And I think you've got a lot, actually staying at home and learning from home gives you much better conditions to learn your target language. All right. And I want to talk about why today. So here are some of the reasons why traveling abroad to learn the language that you're learning are not, make it harder. The first thing and the main thing is that as a tourist, what you're often going to find is that people will speak to you mostly in English. And I'm sure you've had this happen to you before. Even if you do find people that you can practice with in your target language, often it can be a very kind of limited, simple exchange, something like ordering food in a restaurant or buying a train ticket. And so that's often the best case. There are certain countries where people cannot actually actively resist helping you practice their own language, especially if they speak English themselves. There are places where people will not help you practice your target language, and even if you ask very politely, and they will help you. They will want to speak English to you instead. And some of these problems I think can be overcome if you're a kind of really outgoing, confident person who just can kind of insist on practicing the target language, even if they're very basic, and can just go up and talk to people all the time. But, I'm personally not like that at all, and the thought of, often when I'm still at a low level in a language, the thought of going and practicing with native speakers is kind of terrifying. All right, so if you're like that in any way, if you're not a very kind of extroverted, confident person, then, being surrounded by native speakers in another country can be a very intimidating situation. Now, often we might also think that, if we travel abroad, we can make friends. We can find and make new friends in that country who can speak to us in the language. But I think the reality is that that's often the most difficult thing of all. Friends who only speak to you in a language you're learning, I think, are often only a reality when you're already very advanced in the language and you can speak much better than their English. And a lot of people find this. The other thing that's often very common as well is that if you know any people who have moved and lived and worked abroad, then you can often find yourself living and working in an English-speaking environment. This has happened to me before, and this can be a very kind of confusing situation because you live abroad and you've gone there because you want to practice the language, and yet you're living and working in an English environment where even the native speakers around you speak extremely good English, and you can find yourself with very few opportunities to practice the language. And then, of course, with a full-time job, you are often just as busy and tired with limited time as when you're back at home. And so really, you end up in a kind of situation where it's no different at all to actually being at home. And with all, I've lived in 7 countries before. I've lived in Brazil, in Argentina, in France, in Japan, in Qatar, in Egypt. I spent time in Italy as well, and in Spain. And I've experienced all of these things, and it's comparatively rare. I find that I go to a country and I have really good conditions for practicing the language all the time. Such that I couldn't do that kind of conditions that I couldn't recreate at home in somewhere like London, or just with with a Skype connection. Now, there are also plenty of really good reasons why it can be better to stay at home to study. And the big thing for me is that when I'm living at home, I've got a much more stable life and a stable routine. And this means I can kind of get on with my study without too many disruptions. I often find that when I'm living abroad, even if I'm just traveling for a few weeks, the feeling of kind of being far away and not without family and friends around you, it can make it very difficult to do the kind of consistent, regular study that you need in order to make good progress in a language. But for me, staying at home and having that stable environment is ideal for making good progress in a language. When you're at home, you can virtually recreate a perfect immersion environment. You can get movies, you can have podcasts, you can play music, you can read books in your target language. With a bit of effort to gather the right materials, you can create a very authentic immersion environment at home, which can be actually just as good, if not better, than if you were to pick up and move abroad and rent a flat in another country. If you're lucky enough to live in a big city like London or New York, then the chances are you've got lots of people around that you can practice with, native speakers. And although it's not always easy to find someone who is kind of willing to practice with you, I find that actually native speakers that you meet at home are far more likely to kind of understand and appreciate your enthusiasm for their language and be far more willing to help you practice yourself. So it's always difficult to find native speakers who help you practice. But if you live in a big city, you've got loads and loads of options around you, and there's absolutely no need to get on that plane, because you can, with a bit of enthusiasm and a bit of kind of go get it kind of spirit, you can find people to practice with a lot. There's also, where I am in London, there's so many cafes and restaurants, meetup groups and things like that, where again, with a bit of enthusiasm, you can get out there and find people, big groups of people and communities who are either speak the language that you're learning, or even groups of people who are learning the same language and who have the same interest as you, and that can really help motivate you. Now, in terms of learning, if you're someone that likes taking professional lessons, language lessons with teachers, again, you can find these language teachers everywhere. With the internet now, you can get your language lessons online. You don't need to go to the country in order to find teachers. And of course, again, in a big city, if you're looking for materials for studying, even without the internet's got pretty much everything these days. But if you live in a big city, you can find some of the best language materials, and in the big bookstores that you've got in big cities, some of the best anywhere in the world. So there's as far as material goes and having good stuff to study with, then again, you can get all of this stuff at home without the need to go abroad. So a whole bunch of reasons there. I wanted to do that because just to kind of put to bed this idea that you have to travel to learn a language. I think this really applies to the early stages. Once you get to a kind of intermediate level and you can hold a conversation kind of comfortably, once you're at kind of B1, B2 level, where holding that conversation is not such a problem, and you can express yourself and enjoy talking in the language. This is the point for me that I think actually traveling to the country has loads of benefits, because then the chances are that you speak the language better than the people there will speak English. And so you're going to get plenty more opportunities to speak, also potentially to work as well, to join activities and do things that other native speakers there are doing. So there are loads and loads of benefits of traveling once you've already got a certain amount of traction in the language. But for me, and this applies to everything I do now, if you're just getting started with a language, if you're still in the early stages, I don't want you to think that you're missing out by not traveling abroad. And I just want to make the point that you've got everything you need right here at home. All right, so I hope that was helpful. I just wanted to give my perspective on that. If you'd like to ask me a question about language learning, then please do. I'm always looking for great questions. You can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask to leave me a question. I'd also really appreciate it if if you've been getting any value out of these episodes. I'd love to get a star rating and a review of the podcast on iTunes. It's really, really helpful because it helps other people find the podcast as well, so that I'm not just talking to to one person on the other side of the world. It's great to get more people listening to the show. If you'd like to do that, if you'd like to leave me a review, you can go to either to the iTunes store and to search for the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, or you can go directly to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/review, and that will redirect you straight to the correct place on the iTunes store. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to be back in London, but by the time I record the next episode, I'm going to be back home for good in London. I'm picking up and moving everything to London. I actually moved to London a few weeks ago, but I've just been kind of traveling non-stop since then, and that was, in a funny way, kind of the impetus for me to record this episode, because since I've been traveling for the last few weeks, I've got absolutely nothing done because I just don't have a fixed routine or schedule, and I find it really, really difficult to get anything done. So I'm going to be going back to London next week, and I'm going to start everything kind of from scratch. I'm going to be making my podcast more consistently, so hopefully I can bring more value to you guys, and I'm going to be starting up some great initiatives in London as well. So if you live in the UK and you're into language learning, get in touch. Let me know who you are so I can invite you to these events. You can contact me on the website by there's a contact button on the website at iwillteachyoualanguage.com. Shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. storylearning.com/courses.